Neon Genesis Evangelion is one of the most influential anime ever made, but the story of how it got created is almost as dark as the show itself. The man behind Evangelion, Hideaki Anno, was completely broken before he made it. After directing his previous anime, Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water in 1990, Anno fell into a depression that lasted for 4 years. He had little creative control over that project, and it destroyed him mentally. In his own words, written just before Evangelion aired, "I tried to include everything of myself in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Myself, a broken man who could do nothing for 4 years. A man who ran away for 4 years. One who was simply not dead." That's not some dramatic interpretation. That's Anno describing his own state of mind. He wasn't just sad. He was unable to function for 4 years straight. Around episode 16, while writing the character of Rei Ayanami, Anno asked a friend for reading suggestions about mental illness to help him understand her character better. The book he read startled him. He found a diagnosis of his own problems within its pages. All those years of feeling broken, and he finally had a word for it. He had been living with clinical depression without even knowing it. After this realization, the show changed. Halfway through the series run, Anno started infusing the show with his own life struggles and his newly discovered ideas about depression and mental health. The result was a far bleaker and more tragic show, one far more interested in introspective therapy sessions as entire episodes than in flashy battles. When the TV series ended in 1996, fans were furious about the abstract, psychological final 2 episodes. The director was sent death threats, not just angry emails. Anno even briefly includes scans from some of the death threats he was sent in the end of Evangelion film. In a 2021 NHK documentary called Professional: The Way of Work, Anno revealed just how bad things got during that period. "For me, I'm trying to work hard for society and people who love anime, but there was this thread on how to kill Hideaki Anno," the anime creator told NHK. "They kept writing the absolute best ways to kill me, such as, I could be killed this way or that. When I saw this, I stopped caring about everything. Like making anime, I'd had enough. One time I thought about jumping in front of a car. Another time I thought about jumping from the company's roof." NHK asked what stopped him, and Anno replied, "Because that seemed painful." Years later, Anno returned to Evangelion with the rebuild films. The first came out in 2007, the second in 2009. But then production slowed down massively. Studio Kara didn't release the third movie until over 3 years later, in November of 2012. In a statement on the official Evangelion website, Anno described what working on Eva again did to him. "After it was released, I was broken. I fell into what's called a depressive state, the natural result of having spent 6 years grinding down my soul making Eva again." Anno spoke of losing his sense of purpose, asking, "What am I trying to make again? And why have I decided to make a fictitious special effects kind of film?" He also referred to suffering from an unshakable feeling of fatigue. The fourth and final rebuild film didn't come out until 2021, nearly a decade after the third. Anno's statement about surviving this period was haunting. "Thanks to my wife and friends, I was able to remain in this world." That sentence alone tells you everything about where his mind was during those years. The protagonist, Shinji Ikari, is more than a fictional character. As Anno himself explains, Shinji does reflect my character, both the conscious and unconscious parts. Every time Shinji runs away, every time he curls up and refuses to move, every time he hates himself, that's Anno putting his own mental state on screen. The show exists because one man poured his broken psyche into 26 episodes of animation, not knowing if he'd ever feel okay again. The creator of Attack on Titan, Hajime Isayama, grew up in Oyama, a small rural town in Oita Prefecture, Japan. Isayama explained that he came up with the idea for the manga because he lived in a rural Japanese town surrounded by mountains. Those mountains became the direct inspiration for the walls in Attack on Titan, the massive barriers that trap humanity inside. In an NHK interview, Isayama remarked that he felt ambivalent about his hometown as he was growing up. He felt restless during his teenage years and ultimately left out of a desire to change himself. "It was not necessarily ambition that drove me," he commented. "I had a sense of inferiority, a kind of frustration. That restless feeling mirrors what Eren Yeager experiences in the series, the overwhelming desire to see what lies beyond the walls." Isayama wasn't satisfied just living inside his mountain-enclosed town. But what about the Titans themselves? The terrifying naked giants who mindlessly eat humans? That came from a job Isayama had as a young adult. Isayama said the idea for the Titans themselves came to him when he encountered a drunk customer at the internet cafe he was working at. He said he was inspired by the lack of the ability to communicate, even though the person was of the same species, and thought at that moment that the most familiar and scary animal in the world is actually the human. Think about it. A drunk person stumbling around, unable to hold a normal conversation, acting unpredictably. Isayama thought he was powerless, unable to communicate, and the fear of being toppled over by the unreasonable drunk customers. These feelings were reflected in the story of Attack on Titan. That's exactly how Titans behave. They wander aimlessly, show expressions, but can't really communicate, and act on pure instinct. It was this vague, unexplainable frustration that Isayama eventually channeled into Attack on Titan. Two of the main themes in the series are oppression and release. Beyond that, Isayama admitted that he didn't have any particular agenda or message that he wanted to convey. Instead, he wanted to express the raw anger of the victims of a tragedy and how it can drive people to aggression. The Titans, on the other hand, represent things to be frustrated with. The gruesome scenes of Titans eating people also have a specific childhood origin. In an interview with Brutus magazine, when asked about the Gamera films, Isayama said, "I've seen them. In fact, I got some inspiration for my man-eating giants from Gyaos in Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. It was great how they portrayed it feeding on humans. Even if you've seen all the previous Godzilla and Mothra films, this one makes you wonder if it's okay to show to kids." Isayama also mentioned a monster from the anime Hell Teacher Newbie that scared him as a child. When Isayama was a primary school student, he witnessed the La Gioconda monster from an episode of it. The monster, which would suddenly pop its head out of the painting to eat people, is still fresh in Isayama's mind. "At that moment, I was so scared, even being too afraid to go to washroom alone. It seems the fear of Titans is similar to my fear of the man-eating La Gioconda when I was young." In 2010, Isayama posted on his official blog that the character Dot Pixis was based on historical figure Yoshifuru Akiyama, who Isayama called frugal and respectable. Because Akiyama was a general of the Imperial Japanese Army who contributed to the colonization of Korea and the commander of the army stationed in Korea under Japanese occupation, Korean fans commented on the post in disgust and anger. In Isayama's blog entry from December 2010, he wrote, "I should say that it has nothing to do with him at all, but it's true. I'm afraid that it is unacceptable to use him as a model with my drawing skills, but I am using him as a reference. His stories from the Russo-Japanese War are also amazing, but his honest attitude and personality, such as how he gave up his position as a field marshal and became a principal of a rural elementary school, are awe-inspiring. This didn't sit well with many fans, especially in Korea where Japan's colonial history remains a sensitive topic." In 2013, a commenter on Isayama's official blog wrote, "On June 29th, I'm going to beat Hajime Isayama to death with a blunt instrument. I'm totally going to kill him." The threats were copied and pasted repeatedly in the same comment. Other threats were also copied and pasted in mind-boggling numbers, apparently over 1,000 times. Throughout the Attack on Titan creators blog, fans were quite divided over this issue. Though many have expressed their displeasure with Isayama's decision to model Dot Pixis on Akiyama, there were those who came to the defense of both manga creator and military general. Whatever the case, the death threat controversy seems to be acting as a reminder to some Asian nations, including South Korea, of the war crimes perpetuated by Japan in World War II. The identity of who made the threats was never confirmed, but the historians interviewed were unable to confirm if Yoshifuru was directly involved in any war crimes over the course of his career, and neither the comments on Isayama's blog nor the media outlets that reproduced them presented any evidence to back up these claims. What's clear is that Attack on Titan came from a place of real frustration and fear. A young man trapped in a small town, working late nights at an internet cafe, dealing with aggressive customers he couldn't communicate with, channeling childhood fears of being eaten alive into his art. All of that turned into one of the darkest and most successful manga of all time. Hiromu Arakawa grew up on her family's dairy farm in Tokachi, Hokkaido. In her autobiographical manga Hayakusho Kizoku, she talks about helping with daily farm work before and after school. One of the biggest parts of that work was dealing with life and death. Animals were raised, cared for, and eventually slaughtered for food. She explained in interviews that this environment taught her early on that life always has a cost and that nothing stays the same forever. Arakawa has said clearly that these experiences shaped her ideas for Fullmetal Alchemist. The theme of equivalent exchange came from practical farm life. If you want something, you must give something. If you want food, you give effort. If you want money, you give time, labor, or even the life of an animal. She often mentions that the farm taught her that rewards never come without sacrifice. She also grew up during a time when many farms in Japan struggled with low prices and economic pressure. In Hayakusho Kizoku, she describes how her family constantly had to fight to keep the farm running. This sense of instability influenced her focus on how characters in Fullmetal Alchemist deal with harsh realities, limited choices, and the consequences of trying to fix problems too easily. Arakawa has never said that Nina's chimera scene was based on a specific real-life event, but she has explained that the harshness of farm life made her comfortable writing difficult and painful moments. She has said that death was not theoretical where she grew up, it was part of daily life, and that this shaped the serious tone of key story events. For the military themes, Arakawa mentioned in interviews that she researched post-war Japan, especially how people dealt with authority, reconstruction, and the impact of past violence. These ideas helped her build Amestris as a country shaped by long-term conflict and strict military control. Berserk is one of the darkest manga ever created, but what inspired creator Kentaro Miura to build such a brutal, horrifying world? The answer lies in history, horror films, and his own personal relationships. Miura built Berserk's world by pulling from real medieval European history. The dark fantasy setting and medieval European aesthetic were influenced by Conan the Barbarian, Excalibur, and the Elric of Melniboné series. The setting feels authentic because Miura studied real historical sources. Midland seems to be inspired by England, while Tudor is based on medieval France. Mercenary bands were in high demand during the 100 Years' War, while the technology used in the real world war consisted of plate armor, swords, cannons, crossbows, and cavalry with heavy lances, all items used in the conflict between Tudor and Midland. Feudal politics and class divisions from the time also inspired Berserk. The Band of the Hawk, Griffith's mercenary group, directly reflects this. Guts spends most of his early life among mercenaries, and the brutal nature of medieval warfare is shown in graphic detail throughout the series. One aspect of the Catholic Church in medieval Europe that cannot be ignored is the Inquisition, a group committed to purging people who did not live up to Catholic religious law through the use of extreme violence. Mozgus is an inquisitor with deep devotion to his faith. He looks after people whose physical deformities make them unwelcome by society, but he also tortures uncounted numbers of people without regret. For the horror elements, Miura drew from multiple sources. In a 1996 interview for the Berserk Illustrations File interview, Miura had this to say about his influences. There are many things. Movies like Hellraisers and The Name of the Rose. I've liked Escher for a very long time. It's also inspired by Grimm's fairy tales and so on. The God Hand, the demonic gods that pretty much rule the Berserk universe, were inspired by the Cenobites of the Hellraiser movie franchise. Not only visually, but they also have a lot of similarities in terms of being demonic entities that grant stuff to humans while taking something away from them. But perhaps the most personal element was Miura's own friendships. In an interview, author Kentaro Miura revealed that his friendship with later fellow manga artist Koji Mori partially inspired the relationship between Guts and Griffith. In an interview with Yukari Fujimoto, Miura explained how his high school friends became the Band of the Hawk. There really was a guy similar to Judo. We had a Corcus too, and a Rickert. There's no Casca though, since it was a group of guys. And then Pippin is me, in terms of physical appearance. On the inside though, I would have Guts-like thoughts, or Griffith-like thoughts. Miura also described looking up to someone who combined traits of both characters. I was head and shoulders above everyone in terms of drawing, but at the same time, I looked up to the guy who used to act as the leader. He was very much like Griffith in terms of ability. He was the type who put his money where his mouth was, and he even had a bit of that touch of the divine feel to him. In terms of violence though, I'd say he was very much like Guts. Miura also took heavy influence from manga that came before him. The author stated that the manga Fist of the North Star, written by Burenson and illustrated by Tetsuo Hara, was easily one of his biggest inspirations. Series like Violence Jack by Go Nagai and Guin Saga by Kaoru Kurimoto also helped inspire the atmosphere of Berserk. The tragedy is that Miura never finished his masterpiece. On May 6, 2021, Miura died due to acute aortic dissection at the age of 54. His death was publicly announced on May 20, 2021. On June 7, 2022, Hakusensha and Koji Mori announced that Berserk would continue publication, using plans and thoughts that were relayed to Mori by Miura himself. As the only person who knows the ending Miura intended, Mori agreed to continue the series and promised, "I will only write the episodes that Miura talked to me about. I will not flesh it out." The man who partially inspired the Guts-Griffith relationship is now the one responsible for finishing their story. In that sense, Berserk's origins and its future are connected by the same friendship. Go Nagai was born in 1945, the same year World War II ended. He didn't just read about the war's aftermath in textbooks, he grew up surrounded by it. The reason why I depict the effects of war in my comics is because I strongly believe that a person should learn from childhood how war can be destructive and how much people and societies may suffer from it, just the same way I learned it from the stories of adults around me when I was a little child. Nagai was among the first generation of manga artists born after the post-war effects. Witnessing the aftermath firsthand, he incorporated stories to remind his generation on how war works and how there are no actual winners. Devilman began serialization in June 1972 in Shukan Shonen magazine. It started as a TV animation concept. A producer from Toei Animation who had read Nagai's earlier work, Mao Dante, wanted him to create an anime with the devil as its hero, but a very human one. The visual design came from childhood trauma. I tend to think I was greatly influenced by my first images of devils. Gustave Dore's illustrations of Satan trapped in ice in Dante's Inferno, Nagai explained. His father owned a copy of the Divine Comedy with Dore's artwork, and those images stuck with him, but the story's meaning went far deeper than cool demon designs. The theme of Devilman is anti-war, Nagai stated directly in a 2002 foreword. When humans transform into devils and demons, what they really are doing is taking up murder weapons and embarking on war. He explained exactly what each element symbolized. The indiscriminate melding of demons with humans that we see in Devilman refers to the draft system, while the death of Akira Fudo's beloved Miki symbolizes the death of peace. The ending, where humanity destroys itself in paranoid violence while hunting for hidden demons, wasn't meant to be hopeless for its own sake. Near the end of Devilman, Akira screams to those who are supposedly weeding out evil, "You are the true demons." Perhaps those were the words that I, the priest, had wanted to utter. When asked about the apocalyptic conclusion in another interview, Nagai was blunt. Devilman does not have a political ending. I just wanted to underline human stupidity. I partly wrote Devilman with the intention of alerting people, Nagai admitted in his conversation with Hideaki Anno. He expressed concern about Japan's changing attitudes toward military involvement. In our days in Japan, we are indifferent to armament compared to the past. Even decades later, Nagai felt the message remained urgent. There is a sense of Armageddon as we enter a new millennium. Global tension is high, and mankind seems to be on the brink of the final world war. Do human beings really have a bright future? He summed up his core belief simply: there is no justice in war, any war, nor is there any justification for human beings killing one another. The creative process itself felt strange to Nagai. I am the author of Devilman, yet throughout its creation, I felt as though I were being pushed by an invisible power. The story took on a life of its own, growing darker and more apocalyptic than even he had planned. Devilman carries a message of warning as we step toward a bright future. Over 75 series have been officially recognized as being inspired by Devilman, including Neon Genesis Evangelion, Berserk, Parasite, Tokyo Ghoul, and Attack on Titan. Kentaro Miura, creator of Berserk, stated in a 2002 interview that Nagai had a big influence on him. Gen Urobuchi, the writer behind Madoka Magica and Fate Zero, explained that Devilman made him realize that bittersweet endings are the best ones. Pokemon is one of the biggest media franchises in history, but its origin isn't about fame or fortune. It's about a kid who lost his childhood paradise to concrete. Satoshi Tajiri grew up in Machida, a suburb of Tokyo that used to be full of nature. In an interview with Time magazine, Tajiri said there were rice paddies, rivers, forests. It was full of nature. As a child, he spent all his free time catching and studying insects. His father later told the interviewer that other kids used to call Satoshi Dr. Bug. He was obsessed. In the Time interview, Tajiri explained, "As a child, I wanted to be an entomologist. Insects fascinated me. Every new insect was a wonderful mystery, and as I searched for more, I would find more. If I put my hand in a river, I would get a crayfish. Put a stick underwater and make a hole, look for bubbles, and there were more creatures." Then, development came for his hometown. Every year, they would cut down trees, and the population of insects would decrease. The change was so dramatic. A fishing pond would become an arcade center. His bug hunting paradise was literally paved over. The forests and rice paddies became shopping malls and apartment buildings. The insects disappeared. But something interesting happened. In a twist of fate, an arcade center was built on top of the pond where Tajiri once caught crawfish. And instead of resenting it, young Tajiri became obsessed with video games, especially Space Invaders. This new obsession caused problems. Because of his fascination with video games, Tajiri frequently cut classes. As a result, he nearly did not graduate. His father attempted to get him a job at the Tokyo Electric Power Company, but Tajiri refused the job. His parents couldn't understand why their son was throwing his life away at arcades. Eventually, Tajiri started a handwritten gaming magazine called Game Freak in 1982 with his friend Ken Sugimori. Later, they turned it into a game development company, and in 1990, Tajiri got an idea that would change everything. When Tajiri first saw two children playing together with Game Boys using the Game Link cable, he imagined insects crawling along the cable between the two systems. As he thought about the capabilities of the Game Link cable, his idea for Pokemon grew, as he wanted to give modern children the chance to hunt for creatures as he did as a child. That's the core of Pokemon, letting kids experience the joy of discovering and collecting creatures that Tajiri lost when his hometown was developed. But making Pokemon almost destroyed everything. Pokemon Red and Green took 6 years to produce, and nearly bankrupted Game Freak in the process. Often there was barely enough money to pay the employees. The stress was intense. 5 employees quit, and Tajiri did not take a salary, instead living off of his father's income. Investment from Creatures Inc. allowed Game Freak to complete the games. In an interview with Time magazine in 1999, Tajiri stated that for the last 3 3 years of development, he slept for 12 hours and then worked on his games for 24 hours straight. When Pokemon finally released in 1996, very few media outlets gave it attention, believing the Game Boy was a dead console. Nobody expected it to succeed, but it did, and Tajiri made sure to honor what inspired him. In the Japanese version of the Pokemon anime, the main character is named Satoshi, and his rival is Shigeru, named after Tajiri's mentor Shigeru Miyamoto. Sui Ishida was born in Fukuoka, Japan in 1986. He had a quiet childhood, but not an easy one. When he was young, he moved around frequently and was somewhat lonely. His family was Christian in a country where roughly 1% of the population identifies as Christian. That made him different. My parents moved around a lot and were Christians, so when I was a child, I felt alienated being in a family that was slightly different from everyone else's, Ishida explained in his 2018 Yomiuri Shimbun interview, the first time he ever spoke publicly about his work. There have been many times where I've been the listener to my friends regarding topics such as religion, gender, and relationships with your parents. That feeling of being an outsider became the foundation of Tokyo Ghoul. I thought about drawing villains who were part of a minority. It'd be too simple to have them be just cold-blooded killers, so I thought it'd be interesting if there was a species of them that lived among humans. He set the story in Tokyo specifically because I knew that even if strange incidents took place, people would be indifferent to it. Fear of mass society, in other words. Kaneki Ken, the shy college student who becomes half ghoul, came from a personal place. Kaneki was a bit of a self-insert, so he was a difficult character to write until the end. Tokyo Ghoul began serialization in September 2011. For the next 7 years, Ishida chased weekly deadlines without stopping. I felt that if I took a break, I wouldn't be able to bring myself to draw again, so I refused to give myself a break. Then things got dark. From the original Volume 7 onwards, my stance regarding the manga changed. I took on impossible amounts of work to try to push myself. I cast away all sorts of things from my life and poured all of my time into work. Why? I think it was because I was trying to get closer to Kaneki, who's been subjected to torture. The guy was deliberately overworking himself to understand what his fictional character felt during torture. The consequences hit his body hard. I've developed complications in my body. I was scared at first, but after seeing all sorts of symptoms show up every few months, I resigned myself to the fact that this was the kind of body I had. The worst symptom? The most striking part to me was that I lost my sense of taste. No matter what I ate, everything would taste the same. Just like Kaneki, who lost the ability to taste normal food after becoming a ghoul. Even though the symptoms were different, I felt like I turned into a ghoul. At the end of the last volume of Tokyo Ghoul, Ishida shared that he felt guilty for letting his work tie his entire life, dominating his emotions and time, resulting in fluctuations in his personal relationships. And he was honest about something else too. There may be some readers who are disappointed by this, but I haven't thought of drawing Tokyo Ghoul itself as fun. I hate working. On his 10th anniversary of the anime, Ishida surfaced a heartfelt letter where he expressed how he was truly hating himself while writing Tokyo Ghoul. When Tokyo Ghoul finally ended in 2018, Ishida described the feeling clearly. It's like I've been dispossessed of an evil spirit now. During serialization, it felt like I'd been taken over by a different person. Tokyo Ghoul has been something that was intimately intertwined with my life, something that dominated my time and emotions, and something that changed my relationships with other people. There was good that came with it, but oftentimes there was more bad than good. Because of this, I felt like I was finally being released from a cage after being trapped in it for so long. The manga about a guy who loses his humanity might have cost its creator a piece of his own. If you like this video, turn on the notification bell and subscribe for more.